So before we start that, I'd like to invite Councillor Ben Henderson to bring greetings on behalf of the Mayor and City Council.
Thanks, and I'm sorry that I can't stay with you, actually. I had a great conversation over lunch, and it sounds like you had a really fabulous morning and are in store for an even more fabulous afternoon. I wanted a chance to bring greetings from the Mayor and City Council. I'm going to have to take off. You'll literally watch me finish and walk out the door because I got to be back at City Hall by 1:30 for public hearing. But let you know, I think you probably know a lot of where we're at, but I'll go through some stuff because some things may be new. We obviously have a couple of fairly major initiatives, both of which I've been involved with, one around housing and the other one around poverty, that are ones that the housing one obviously is slightly further ahead because we're now, I think, in what, year 6 of the 10-year plan? 6 or 7, I know, which is sad because we're not there yet by any means in terms of what our goals were. And I would say in terms of our 10-year housing plan is not for want of significant and remarkable effort. We've now housed, I think, well over 3,000 people. It's I actually have the number here, 3,525, probably changing daily. We've hit 5,000? Okay, these are old numbers then. I thought it was more than that, yeah. But, and I think as a result of that, we saw our homeless counts going down significantly for a number of years. We're pretty sure, however, with what's changed in the economy recently, that trend is reversed. So it's an interesting example of no matter how many people we can get into housing, and that's a significant number of people into housing. I think that would mean we would have housed everybody that was part of the count when we started on this. That the back door is still seriously wide open in terms of people who are now homeless who weren't homeless when we started, and I think that's a real concern that we need to understand. I think it's also, some of the things that I feel really strongly about. I mean, I was a big supporter of Housing First, but I think there have been some misconceptions about Housing First that we have to yell and scream about. The idea that everybody's going to be able to graduate out of Housing First after a year, I think, is beyond naive and not really the point of Housing First. I think we need to be in a situation where we recognize that some people are going to need permanent support, but that it's still way better for us to have them in that permanent support housed and than it is to leave them out on the street with all the kind of other ways that are much more expensive and have far less dignity involved with them and much more problematic. So I think there's some mind shifts that have to still happen there in terms of understanding, and clearly we still have a huge gap in having the availability of permanent supportive housing in the city, and I think that's the major piece of the puzzle that we recognize, I think the province recognizes. We've had some major pushes as well. There's a real worry in the city right now and actually across the country that I think is now going to change, but a real uphill battle with a lot of expiring operating agreements. This is housing that had been built and operated with support of the federal government, the province, and the city for the last 20, 30 years, whereas the agreements were expiring, they just weren't being replaced, and the money was being pulled back out of the system. I think that message has now gotten through to the new federal government. It certainly got through to the province, and I think hopefully we'll be able to really make some progress in terms of the renewal of some of the existing social housing stock, in particular, that we have in this city, that either was going to collapse or the subsidies were going to come off, so the deeper rent subsidies would have vanished, and it might still have been fallen into the affordable housing category, but a lot of people who couldn't afford that affordable housing piece would have been out on the street. So we're hoping for some good news in both of the new budgets coming up on this. It's something the city and cities across the country have been pushing very hard for. And I guess it leads to the other piece of the puzzle for me, was in doing all of that work, there were a number of projects the city had been doing over the years. REACH, which was our long-term project around trying to change conditions around safety, by going in and working early and trying to put the investment in early in terms of prevention, so that we wouldn't have to deal with the policing down the road. Obviously this, and a lot of these, it was really clear poverty was at the base of what we were trying to do, and we were talking about housing, we were talking about safety, we were talking about neighborhoods, we were talking about all these things without talking about the root piece of the poverty. And it was on that basis that a number of us started originally with a steering committee, which wasn't just the city. There were a lot of partners. The mayor then took it over as a task force, and have created the new strategy, which we're just in the middle of putting the implementation piece to, which is our commitment to eliminate poverty within a generation in the city. And I would stress two things. I mean, the essence of talking generationally, I think, is also part of what's at the core of the housing piece. I think it's what at the core of is that we've put Band-Aids on things for a long time, and it hasn't got us anywhere. And that if we really want to achieve the long-term change, then we have to change the conditions. We have to look at core pieces. We have to recognize that it's not going to happen overnight. You have to change the core so that we don't continue to pass poverty on generation after generation after generation. So there's a lot of if you haven't looked at that strategy, I would really encourage you to have a look at it. And I would say it's not about saying we're going to walk away from putting the Band-Aids on, because there are people that are suffering today that need to be taken care of, but it's looking at some of the root causes to see if we can actually change the long-term condition in the city and actually do what is really the only acceptable answer, which is the elimination of poverty in our city. There's some key pieces to that, four basic pillars. One is true reconciliation with the Aboriginal Edmontonians. Another one's facing poverty today, preventing poverty tomorrow, and a commitment to a good life for all, that all citizens of the city should be able to enjoy a quality of life in the city. A lot more detail to it. A real commitment to dealing with the very real problems of racism in the city that I think we need to acknowledge and we need to be able to get underneath. It's also about getting in with the early childhood. And I would say another thing that was loud and clear is that we needed to be able to deal with the kind of core needs of housing and transportation, and that I think we were just having a conversation at lunch that there's more and more talk about looking at something like a guaranteed income. But if we're not prepared, I mean, most of the people living in poverty in the city are working more than full time. The real problem of poverty in the city, a lot of it is working poor. So if we're not prepared to deal with the income side of things, we have to deal with the expense side of things, and that means affordable transportation, that means affordable housing, that means affordable food, that means access to good school programs, and all those things that hopefully will mean that we can make a real change over time. So that's sort of where the city's at right now. I'd really encourage you, I mean, I think you're probably all aware of the 10-year plan and what's in that, and where we're at on it, but the poverty elimination strategy is quite new, and the implementation piece of that is still in the working out stages. So I would really encourage everybody to go have a peek at it if you haven't. It is not designed to be the city. The city is there to facilitate it, to make it happen. We cannot do it alone. We don't have the resources to do it alone. We're absolutely committed to being a partner, but it's going to have to be the whole community to make it actually happen. And as well, obviously, the other word is the government, but it's not just us. We've done it in partnership all the way along with groups like the United Way, Bissell Center's been at the table. There's been a whole bunch of different people at the table, and it's where these poverty strategies have been successful in the past. It's been because it's a community-wide effort, and all the partners sit down together, figure out where we're trying to get to long-term, and begin to change some of the base conditions and rethink what we're trying to do and how we're trying to get there. So that's where we're at. I'd love to be able to stay and answer questions, but I know you have far more interesting people to hear from than me, so, and I better run. So thank you all for everything you do. Thank you all for the efforts you make on this behalf, and have a wonderful afternoon.